The air tasted like burnt gunpowder and unfulfilled promises. Sergeant Hawk Riley didn't need to look at his watch to know it was 0200 hours. The jungle had its own clock, ticking off the minutes in the drip of moisture condensing on the triple-strand concertina wire outside their defensive perimeter. The smell of the earth here, deep in the A Shau Valley, wasn't just rot. It was copper, thick and sweet, promising blood. Hawk knelt by the lip of the trench, the damp clay chilling his fatigues despite the heat trapped by the oppressive canopy. For 3 days, they had been the silent, isolated guests of Firebase Raven, a communications repeater station so forgotten by command that they felt more like ghosts guarding an empty tomb. But the ghosts weren't alone. Earlier that evening, the rain had stopped, and with the silence came a sound that froze the blood. The rhythmic, methodical chipping of steel against rock, too close to be mistaken for anything natural. The North Vietnamese army wasn't probing. They were setting the table. Hawk traced the outline of the M16's pistol grip, the polymer slick with sweat. He looked across the small, triangular firebase at the two men who represented the entirety of his world now. Specialist 4 Grizz Olsen, the machine gunner, a man built like a stump but with the eyes of nervous deer, was checking the last of the linked M60 belts, stacking them neatly by the lip of his firing position. Grizz didn't talk much, preferring the mechanical surety of the 70-pound weapon to human conversation. Then there was Ramirez, their medic, barely 19, and already carrying a 1,000-yard stare that made him look 100. Ramirez wasn't looking at the wire. He was looking up, through the narrow slit of the jungle ceiling where the stars should have been, searching perhaps for salvation or just a breath of clean air unmixed with the scent of fear. The tension wasn't a fog. It was a physical weight pressing the air out of their lungs. They knew, with the cold certainty only acquired by men living on the razor's edge, that the sounds weren't a patrol. This was the hammer, finally dropping. The sheer professionalism of the silence surrounding them was the most terrifying prelude of all. They hadn't heard a single cough, snap of a twig, or dropped piece of gear since dusk. The NVA were moving as a single, disciplined entity, flowing around Raven like water around a stone. Hawk swallowed the metallic taste in his mouth, the certainty crystallizing. They were surrounded by far more than a platoon. He shifted his weight, the leather of his boots creaking slightly, a noise that sounded like thunder in the immense quiet. He needed to tell Miller, their RTO, to get back on the horn, but he couldn't break the spell. They were waiting for the jungle itself to attack, and the jungle was currently holding its breath. The moment stretched, agonizing, until the only sound remaining was the frantic pounding of his own heart against his ribs. This wasn't combat yet. This was the existential dread that preceded it, the silent, eerie acknowledgement that they were simply meat waiting for the butcher's knife, cut off completely from the world that forgot they existed 2 weeks ago when the monsoon rains washed out the nearest road. The cauldron, as the men privately nicknamed Firebase Raven, was less a defensive position and more an elevated coffin. It sat on a minor ridge line, overlooking a dense tributary of the Sep1 River, surrounded on 3 sides by triple canopy jungle so thick that visibility often dropped to 20 feet, even at midday. They had been tasked with maintaining the antenna array, a relic from an aborted intelligence operation, but the true mission had boiled down to just survival. Hawk recalled the briefing, the detached voice of the colonel outlining their deployment. Routine observation, minimal contact expected, rotate out in 10. That was 11 days ago. Now, they were 4, down from 8 after 2 men were medevaced with jungle rot, and 2 others caught a lucky mortar round during a quiet afternoon coffee break 4 days past. The remaining 4 were bound by the mutual understanding that they were expendable. Hawk lifted his binoculars, wiping the lenses on his sleeve, and focused on the black mass of the perimeter wire. He saw nothing. He expected nothing. He knew the enemy was lying prone, perhaps only 20 yards away, camouflaged not just by vegetation, but by patience honed over decades of conflict. Grizz shifted. The sound of the M60's locking mechanism allowed reassurance in the darkness. "Sergeant," Grizz murmured, his voice a low rumble. "I heard it again. 5 minutes ago. Sounded like metal grating low down. Hawk nodded, not taking his eyes off the wire. He had heard it too, a subtle scratching noise, far too deliberate for a stray animal. It meant only one thing. They were using sappers, or perhaps specialized demolition teams, creeping under the wire, maybe planning charges, maybe clearing paths for the main assault. Ramirez, you listening? Hawk whispered. Ramirez, clutching his medical satchel, snapped his attention back. Yes, Sergeant. The digging. No digging now, son. Listen for the whisper. Anything moving low to the ground, you light it up. Don't hesitate. Don't ask questions. Ramirez looked pale, but nodded resolutely. Got it. The terrifying part wasn't the imminent fight. It was the realization that the NVA had achieved total tactical surprise in their deployment. They had moved an estimated company, perhaps more, right up to the very wire without being detected by U.S. patrols or air reconnaissance, likely due to the relentless cloud cover. The NVA were not just fighting for territory. They were fighting to obliterate this insignificant outpost and demonstrate their capability to command. Hawk's gaze swept over the small dirt path that led to the antenna bunker, their designated rally point if the perimeter was breached. It wasn't much, just a thick concrete slab built into the hillside, but it offered the only hope of cover. He gripped the field phone receiver, his knuckles white, connecting to Miller, who was sheltered in the RTO pit near the center of the base. Miller, you getting anything? Miller's voice crackled, high and strained. Static, Sergeant. Maybe some atmospheric interference, maybe jamming. I'm transmitting status 6 alpha every 10 minutes, but I haven't received confirmation since 1800. Status 6 alpha, under heavy observation, anticipate immediate assault. Hawk knew that if Miller wasn't hearing them, command wasn't hearing them. They were marooned, utterly alone on this hill. He cut the line the decision made. No help was coming. They had to rely solely on the thin line of mud, wire, and sheer willpower separating them from the thousands of determined soldiers outside. The metal grating sound came again, closer this time, just to the left of Grizz's position. It sounded like the world was filing its teeth, preparing to bite. The first explosion didn't sound like thunder. It sounded like the world tearing itself in half. It hit the western perimeter with such force that the ground lifted 5 feet, spitting mud, shrapnel, and shattered timber high into the air. It wasn't a mortar, but a massive, shaped charge, designed specifically to annihilate the concertina wire and the earthworks beneath it. Before the ringing in Hawk's ears subsided, the night was lit by a blinding, overlapping series of muzzle flashes from the jungle line. The opening salvo of the NVA's preparatory fire was not just machine guns, but entire platoons firing automatically, sweeping the entire area above the trenches, trying to keep every American head pinned down while the main assault wave moved through the gap. The sheer volume of fire was terrifying, an impenetrable sheet of lead ripping the surrounding vegetation to shreds. Splinters rained down like needles. Hawk screamed, his voice swallowed by the cacophony. Grizz! Fire Sector Charlie. Light it up. Grizz, already fused to his M60, didn't need the command. The big machine gun roared to life, a deep, rhythmic bark that cut through the sharp crackle of the AK-47s. Grizz was firing short, controlled bursts, aiming low into the gap created by the explosion. His tracers, beautiful crimson arcs, flew straight and true, illuminating dark, moving shapes that dissolved instantly under the impact of the heavy slugs. The smoke from the explosion, mixed with cordite and wet, churning earth, tasted metallic and suffocating. Hawk raised his M16, peering over the protective sandbags, firing deliberately at the flashes, trying to suppress the concentrated fire directed at Grizz. The adrenaline surged, sharp and cold, cutting through the fear. The wait was over. The impossible had arrived, and the human body's immediate response was simply to move, to act, to fight the instinct to curl up and vanish. A figure, silhouetted momentarily by a burst of their own fire, ran toward the gap. Hawk tracked him, squeezed the trigger, and the figure pitched forward without a sound. Then another and another. They weren't rushing. They were a determined, relentless flow, already pouring through the gaping breach in the wire. "Ramirez!" Hawk yelled, crawling toward the medic who was 10 feet to his left. "Casualty check. Keep your head down and stay off the perimeter unless you see a direct threat." Ramirez, pale but focused, had pulled his helmet low and was already scanning the trench line for wounded. The noise was unbearable. Every nerve ending was screaming. Hawk could feel the vibrations of the heavy fire transmitted through the very ground he lay on. He reached the end of his magazine, dropping the spent metal shell into the mud, slapping a fresh one home. The immediate tactical realization sank in. They couldn't hold the perimeter indefinitely. They were outnumbered perhaps 50 to 1, defending an open wound of a breach. Their only chance was to make the NVA pay so dearly for every foot of ground that they hesitated, allowing the 4 men to fall back to the concrete bunker and attempt a final, desperate communications attempt. But falling back meant abandoning the advantage of height and visibility. As Hawk turned to check on Miller in the RTO pit, another series of explosions rocked the northern flank. Not shaped charges this time, but standard hand grenades, signaling that the NVA were already inside the first layer of defense and clearing the way. The fight had entered the close quarters stage much faster than Hawk had anticipated. They were fighting ghosts who had turned into flesh, and the flesh was running toward them with bayonets fixed. The air grew thick with a fine red mist where Grizz's M60 had been churning the ground. The machine gunner was a monument of disciplined firepower, ignoring the slugs that whizzed past his helmet, concentrating solely on the breach. The enemy, driven by relentless political conviction and the momentum of the massed attack, continued to flood into the perimeter. Hawk counted 3 separate figures who had managed to duck under the M60's line of fire and were now scrambling towards a trench. He didn't use his rifle. He reached for the grenade pouch on his vest. He pulled the pin, counting to 2, 1,000, to 1,000, and tossed the fragmentation grenade toward the nearest runner. The blast was sharp and local, scattering dirt and body parts. He immediately followed it with another, aiming it to interrupt the next wave coming through the wire. The tactic worked, momentarily clearing the immediate threat, but he knew this was unsustainable. Fragmentation grenades were a limited resource, and the enemy was limitless. Grizz suddenly let out a strangled cry, his M60 sputtering and then falling silent. Hawk's blood ran cold. "Grizz! Status!" he yelled over the continuous crackle of automatic fire. Grizz slowly raised his massive head. "Jammed, Sergeant! Spent brass linkage, damn it!" The silence of the M60 was a deafening vacuum in the noise of the battle, and the NVA knew immediately. Their fire shifted, converging on Grizz's position. Hawk crawled quickly, traversing the muddy floor of the trench, ignoring the sharp sting of debris kicked up by near misses. He reached Grizz, who was frantically trying to clear the chamber, his big hands fumbling slightly under the pressure. "Give me cover," Grizz demanded. Hawk pressed his face into the mud, laying down fire with his M16 into the gap, trying to keep the enemy's heads down long enough for Grizz to fix the weapon that was their primary defense. Ramirez materialized beside them, moving with an eerie, almost professional calm, despite the chaos. He wasn't armed, but he scanned the area, his eyes moving constantly from the enemy flashpoints to the 2 exposed men. "Sergeant, you need to pull back. I saw 3 more coming around the south bend. They're flanking the trench." Hawk didn't hear the warning until a blinding light exploded directly behind Grizz. It wasn't enemy fire. It was Miller, the RTO, having frantically popped a parachute flare from the central bunker, hoping to illuminate the scene for a phantom helicopter or simply to deny the NVA the cover of absolute darkness. The sudden, incandescent light turned the world into a stark landscape of exaggerated shadows. They could see the enemy clearly now. Dozens of men, wearing pith helmets and green uniforms, many of them carrying satchel charges or RPG launchers. The enemy commander, visible only for a split second in the flare's harsh light, raised his hand and pointed directly at Grizz and Hawk. They were the key target now. Grizz finally got the linkage clear. The M60 roared back to life, spitting flame and hot metal, but the delay had cost them dearly. A squad of NVA had already reached the lip of the trench, throwing their own grenades. Hawk shouted a warning and shoved Grizz down hard, just as a potato masher detonated directly on the sandbag parapet, covering them both in a shower of hot dirt and concrete dust. Hawk felt a blinding flash of pain in his left shoulder, followed by instant numbness. He wasn't hit badly, just stunned, but Grizz, pinned under him, was coughing violently, his face smeared with mud and blood, his eyes wide with shock. The breach was now undeniable, and the defense had devolved into a series of desperate micro-battles. The grenade blast had temporarily deafened Hawk, turning the continuous, overwhelming sound of battle into a muffled, thrumming beat. He felt Ramirez's hands on his shoulder, swiftly checking the wound. Just shrapnel, Sergeant. Deep bruise, but clean. Ramirez was already moving away, his face etched with grim determination. He sprinted, low to the ground, toward Grizz, who was struggling to get the M60 back into position, the heavy weapon proving difficult to maneuver one-handed after the blast. The NVA, sensing the weakening defense, pressed their advantage. Two figures leaped into the trench, their bayonets glistening in the weak, flickering light of the flare now descending slowly toward the ground. Hawk brought his M16 up, firing two quick bursts, dropping both men before they could gain purchase on the slippery mud. He heard a sickening thud behind him. Grizz had managed to swing the M60 up, using the buttstock like a club, knocking the third assailant back, buying time to pivot the weapon. This was not skill now. This was sheer, frantic muscle memory and the primal will to survive one more second. Hawk saw Ramirez, ignoring the danger, hook his hands under the tripod of the M60, helping Grizz stabilize the weapon. Their eyes locked for a fleeting second, the medic and the machine gunner, a wordless agreement passing between them. They were not fighting for the flag, the doctrine, or the politicians who had sent them here. They were fighting purely for the existence of the man standing next to them. This unbreakable bond, forged in the terror of shared vulnerability, was the only thing keeping the line from snapping entirely. They were fighting for the chance to see each other's face in the next 5 minutes. In the heart of this impossible, terrifying moment, an urgent question rises. In a situation where every logical calculation screams retreat, and survival means breaking faith with the man beside you, what is the core, primal source of the absolute commitment these soldiers found in each other, even when they knew the odds against them were insurmountable and the strategic fight was already lost? Share your thoughts on that profound human connection in the comments below. For Hawk, the answer was simple. He couldn't leave Grizz or Ramirez to die alone, and he knew they felt the same way about him. That commitment translated directly into covering fire. He emptied his magazine, trying to suppress the concentrated fire that was now pinning the two men down. They were running low on ammunition. The rate of fire was unsustainable. Hawk grabbed a bandolier of M16 magazines from a discarded pack, stuffing them into his webbing. He had maybe 3 full magazines left, and Grizz had perhaps one more belt for the M60. The defense was now officially in the last-ditch phase. He yelled at them. The command strained through his injured jaw. Fall back to the bunker. Now, Grizz, providing one last deafening burst, managed to heave the M60 backward toward the center of the base, and Ramirez, grabbing the tripod, stumbled after him. Hawk remained, covering their retreat with sporadic, aimed fire, knowing that the moment he moved, the NVA would flood the space. The perimeter had been sacrificed. They were retreating to the center, hoping the concrete of the RTO bunker could buy them the final minutes they needed. The retreat to the RTO bunker was 50 feet of pure, open hell. The flare had long since descended and burned out, plunging them back into murky darkness, but the NVA had found the range. As Grizz dragged the M60, his large frame an easy target, the incoming fire intensified, kicking up geysers of mud all around him. Hawk moved in a low crouch, firing 3-round bursts, trying to draw attention away from the slower-moving pair. Ramirez, having reached the relative safety of the bunker entrance, immediately turned around, exposing himself slightly to grab Grizz's harness and pull the exhausted machine gunner and his weapon into the narrow doorway. Hawk dove headlong into the small, dirt-floored entryway just as a salvo of rocket-propelled grenades struck the exterior walls of the bunker. The impact felt less like an explosion and more like a physical punch delivered by a giant. The air inside the small space compressed violently, stealing their breath and replacing it with concrete dust and the acrid smell of high explosives. For a moment, total silence reigned within the bunker, a vacuum of shock and sensory overload, while the world outside continued its furious, lethal chatter. Miller, the RTO, huddled in the corner by his radio set, looked up, his eyes wide and terrified but alive. "Sergeant, the radio, it's dead," Miller stammered, pointing to the smoking handset. "The last blast must have shorted the primary antennae line. I can't transmit anything, not even the emergency beacon." Hawk felt a profound, crushing weight of finality settle on him. If the radio was dead, they had no link, no hope of aerial support, no way to signal their location, or even to report the overwhelming size of the force that had just wiped out Raven. He wiped the dust from his eyes, assessing the situation. The bunker was approximately 10 by 10 feet, built half into the hillside, with walls of thick reinforced concrete. It was structurally sound, but had only one entrance and one heavily sandbag ventilation slit. It was a perfect choke point, but it was also a tomb. Hawk looked at the faces around him. Miller, young and defeated. Ramirez, tending instinctively to his own scraped leg. And Grizz, reloading the M60 belts with mechanical, unwavering focus. "Okay," Hawk said, his voice raw but steady, forcing confidence into the small space. "Listen up. This is it. This is the last stop. They've breached the wire, they've wiped the perimeter, and they know where we are. We fight until the last round is spent, or they blow the door in. We don't surrender. We don't break. We hold this bunker until dawn, or until we stop breathing. Grizz, you take the door. Miller, you keep working on that radio, even if you have to connect a goddamn wire directly to the sun. Ramirez, you watch our backs and keep us patched up." He looked at them one by one, meeting their gazes. He saw fear, yes, but beneath it, the hardened steel of acceptance and shared resolve. They had nothing left to lose, which, paradoxically, made them incredibly dangerous. The NBA's fire was slackening outside, indicating they were reorganizing, preparing for the final, brutal push on the last hardpoint. The silence returned, but this time it was pregnant with guaranteed violence, not possibility. The wait inside the bunker was worse than the intense fighting outside. Confined in the small, stifling space, the air quickly became thick with sweat, fear, and the metallic tang of drying blood. Ramirez, finished checking his own superficial wound, turned his attention to Grizz, who was nursing his badly bruised ribs from the grenade blast. The medic worked quickly, silently, taping bandages tight, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency. He avoided looking at the door, which Grizz was leaning against, M60 muzzle pointed squarely at the weak, wooden threshold. Ramirez was 19, an only child from Fresno, pulled from his first semester of college to serve. He had signed up believing he could save lives, only to find himself in a constant state of triage, deciding who was too far gone and who could wait. He hadn't saved anyone significant tonight. He had only patched up the fighters so they could go back out and kill again. He looked at Hawk, who was meticulously cleaning the dirt and grit from his rifle's action, his movements slow and deliberate, a meditative ritual of survival. Hawk caught his eye. "You okay, kid?" Ramirez just nodded, the lie too effortless to bother refuting. He wasn't okay. He kept seeing the face of the NBA soldier he had seen Hawk shoot just before retreating. A young man, maybe 17, his expression frozen in mid-stride. He wondered if that boy had a mother, a life he was forced to abandon for this muddy, pointless hill. The duality of his role, healer and participant in carnage, had never felt so sharp. He checked his supplies. 2 morphine syrettes left, a limited supply of quick-clot gauze, and an overwhelming sense of futility. If any of them took a serious hit now, especially a stomach or head wound, the best he could offer was comfort until the end. There was no medevac, no backup surgeon, only the 4 of them trapped in their concrete shell. He remembered his oath, the Hippocratic ideal, and contrasted it with the immediate, visceral reality of the war. Survival demanded violence, and healing only postponed the inevitable return to violence. Yet, there was an unexpected depth to the bond here. When Grizz had been hit, Ramirez hadn't hesitated. The instinct to protect his comrade had overridden his own personal safety. That instantaneous selflessness, born not of bravery but necessity, was the strongest drug in the jungle. He reached for his canteen, the water tasting flat and metallic, and offered it to Miller, who was now systematically pulling apart the damaged radio, trying to trace the severed antenna line. Miller, shaking slightly, managed a thin smile of thanks. "I think I found it, Ramirez. If I could just bypass this damaged capacitor." Ramirez watched the RTO struggle, recognizing the desperate hope in the younger man's eyes, the need to restore contact, the yearning for someone, anyone, to know they existed. The medic knew that the real fight wasn't happening outside the bunker right now. It was happening inside their heads, a battle against despair, and the simple act of trying to fix a broken machine was as vital as Grizz's M60 for maintaining their collective sanity. The quiet stretched, an unnatural, paralyzing thing. It was 0345. Hawk knew the NVA wouldn't wait for dawn, but they were taking their time, possibly bringing up heavier weapons, maybe waiting for their sappers to plant charges right against the concrete walls. The exhaustion was a heavy cloak, weighing on Hawk's consciousness, threatening to pull him under. He hadn't slept more than 2 hours straight in 4 days. He closed his eyes for a second, and in the darkness, the jungle roared. He heard the phantom sounds of the enemy creeping, the faint whispers that weren't there, the distinct crunch of boots on gravel that didn't exist inside the bunker. He snapped his eyes open, adrenaline surging. The psychological wall was starting to crumble. He looked at Grizz, whose big body was slumped against the entrance, his breathing deep and ragged, but his hand still firmly on the M60's grip. Miller, humming quietly to himself, was twisted into a pretzel of wires and tools, ignoring the external threat by focusing entirely on his intricate, technical problem. Ramirez sat across from him, staring blankly at the far wall, his hands wrapped tightly around a blood-soaked bandage. Hawk felt compelled to speak, to break the suffocating silence, to tether them all back to the present reality before the stress cracked them completely. "Grizz," Hawk murmured, his voice barely a rasp. "Tell me about that truck you were saving up for." Grizz slowly lifted his head, his eyes heavy. A small, faint smile touched his lips, the first genuine expression Hawk had seen on him in days. It was a '55 Ford F-100, restored, midnight blue paint job. I was going to use it to haul timber back home in Montana. Nothing runs like those old motors, Sergeant. Nothing. Grizz's voice was low, filled with a nostalgic warmth that contrasted violently with the metallic coldness of their situation. Ramirez cut in, his voice thin. "You ever take it fishing?" Grizz nodded slowly. "Used to fish the Blackfoot River with my old man. Ice-cold water. Nothing like this muck." They talked for 5 minutes, maybe 10, about home, about things clean and green and far away. Montana winters, Fresno vineyards, the smell of clean asphalt streets. They didn't talk about the future, because the future was a mathematical impossibility. They talked about the past, about the concrete memories that proved their lives had meaning outside of this bunker. It was a shared farewell, a quiet resignation wrapped in reminiscence. Hawk knew this was a vital, necessary pause, a reaffirmation of the men they were before the war stripped them down to killer and casualty. But the conversation couldn't last. A new sound pierced the night, an unmistakable, terrifying thumping that grew steadily louder, the heavy thwump-thwump of mortar tubes being dropped and fired, too close for comfort. The NVA were preparing their final, devastating barrage before assaulting the bunker entrance. The moment of peace was over. The memories had to be put away. It was time to fight for the right to remember. The first mortar round hit close enough to shake the dust from the ceiling. The second, slightly farther away, seemed to be aimed at softening the ground around the entrance. The third was a direct hit on the eastern side of the bunker, and though the concrete held, the concussion was violent, momentarily stunning them all. Hawk grabbed his helmet, checking his rifle. They're zeroing in. Grizz prepped to meet them outside. Grizz nodded, scrambling to his feet, M60 in hand. Miller, his face streaked with sweat and grime, let out a triumphant gasp. "Sergeant, I got it. I spliced the antennae wire. I've got signal weak, but I've got status." Hawk grabbed Miller by the collar, pulling the smaller man close. "You send a last transmission. Tell them we are Firebase Raven, overrun, 1st Regiment in VA, requesting immediate priority artillery strike on our coordinates. Call sign Victor Bravo 40. Tell them, danger close dash." Miller's hands flew over the keypad, typing the terse, desperate message. As he worked, the main assault began. The air filled with the high-pitched shriek of hundreds of men screaming the war cry, punctuated by whistles and the continuous rattle of automatic rifles. They weren't moving covertly now. They were running full tilt toward the bunker, intending to overwhelm the position with sheer human mass. Grizz braced himself by the doorway, firing short, controlled bursts through the ventilation slit, raking the open ground, trying to stem the tide. He was careful, conserving ammo, but the sheer volume of the attackers was overwhelming. They were taking fire from 3 sides now, targeting the slit and the door. An RPG slammed into the wall near the door, tearing away a chunk of concrete and momentarily filling the bunker with smoke and debris. Grizz grunted, stumbling back, but remained upright. "They're stacking up, Sergeant. I need to clear the field of fire." Hawk knew what he meant. The NVA were using the bodies of their own fallen comrades as makeshift cover, inching closer to the doorway. Grizz couldn't keep them pinned forever. "Ramirez, take this." Hawk shoved 2 fragmentation grenades into the medic's hands. "Cover the entrance. Grizz and I are going out the door to push them back 30 feet. If we go down, you seal the entrance and pray for that artillery strike." Ramirez didn't argue. He moved instantly to the corner, readying the grenades. Hawk looked at Grizz, a wordless communication passing between them. They both knew this was likely suicide, a frantic gambit to buy Miller the final few seconds he needed to transmit the coordinates. Hawk reached up, slapping Grizz hard on the shoulder. "You're the shield, Grizz. Give me the angle." Grizz nodded, taking a deep, ragged breath. Hawk kicked the plywood door open, and they rushed out into the maelstrom, 2 figures engulfed instantly by the relentless gunfire. Grizz let loose the M60 in a furious, continuous belt, sweeping the semicircle in front of the bunker, pouring a wall of lead into the charging NVA. Hawk, weaving behind the heavy fire, emptied his last 3 magazines, focusing on the men trying to flank them. They pushed forward 10 feet, then 20, forcing the NVA wave to buckle under the unexpected counterattack. But they were completely exposed. Hawk saw the flash of an RPG muzzle in the darkness, aimed directly at Grizz. He screamed a warning, tackled Grizz sideways, knocking the weapon wide, just as the rocket struck the ground, sending them sprawling. Grizz landed hard, but the M60 was still in his hand, and he resumed firing instantly, buying Hawk the precious second to reload his last few rounds from his pocket. The counterattack lasted exactly 47 seconds, but it bought them the necessary distance. Hawk, using the muzzle flash as his guide, saw 2 more NVA rush toward the bunker entrance, desperate to exploit the opening. Ramirez, fulfilling his terrifying promise, tossed the 2 fragmentation grenades. The blasts were timed perfectly, catching both assailants mid-stride and sending shrapnel and dirt flying back into the bunker entrance, sealing it for the moment. Hawk scrambled back inside, pulling Grizz, who was coughing uncontrollably, behind him. Grizz's massive arms were shaking with exhaustion, but the M60 had not been dropped. "Miller, Did you send it? Hawk gasped, collapsing against the concrete wall, clutching his shoulder. Miller's voice was high with strained relief and terror. Yes, Sergeant. Message transmitted. Received confirmation. Victor Bravo 40, danger. Close strike inbound. 5 minutes. 5 minutes. 5 minutes until a massive artillery strike, likely fired from miles away, slammed into their exact location. It was their salvation and their certain doom. They had asked for a nuclear option on their own coordinates. The NVA, stunned by the ferocity of the counterattack and the sudden, overwhelming M60 fire, paused their rush, regrouping just outside the effective range of the machine gun. The silence descended again, heavier, more profound, a countdown. They could hear the voices outside now, muffled shouts in Vietnamese, likely confirming that the Americans were trapped in the bunker. Grizz slumped against the wall, clutching his side. Ramirez rushed to him, tearing open the massive man's fatigues. Ribs are broken, Grizz. I can't stop the bleeding inside. Grizz looked at Hawk, his eyes clear and accepting. Worth it, Sergeant. They stayed out. Hawk looked at Miller. Miller, is that strike confirmed? Miller nodded, tears streaming down his face. Yes, Sergeant. They know it's danger close. They set fire within 3 minutes. Hawk knew the NVA heard the faint static of the radio, knew they understood that the end was near. He heard the sound of heavy metal dragging against the ground outside. They were rolling up an anti-tank weapon, aiming to blow the bunker apart before the artillery arrived. Ramirez lay on the door. Hawk ordered, his voice suddenly calm, final. Grizz, last belt. Put every damn round into the door when I tell you. He looked at the bunker entrance, waiting for the telltale denting or splintering that would signal the incoming shot. The NBA would get one chance to destroy the bunker. They had 2 minutes left until the artillery barrage turned their world into vapor. Hawk held his last grenade, his thumb resting on the pin. He didn't think of home or family or the future. He thought only of the 3 faces around him, his brothers in this concrete cage. They had fought for each other's minutes, and now they would share the final second. The sound of the NVA setting up the heavy weapon was agonizingly close, the scraping of metal against rock. Then the silence, the final, terrifying moment before the shot.